Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast brought to you by BuckeyeHuddle.com. I am Marc Givler. We've got a first timer, I think, in Skull Session Recruiting Podcast history. We've got Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com here. How are we doing, Tony?
I'm doing well, Mark. Thanks for having me. It's about time you have a recruiting expert on the show.
Yes, we've had maybe too much Kevin Noon on. Just not up to snuff. Get the real recruiting expert on staff up here. We'll get Alex on here eventually. See if he can take the crown. But yeah. So yes, we have Buckeye Weekly star Tony Gerdeman in the house. This is our special commitment edition. We got a big news here on a Sunday evening, I guess late Sunday afternoon, we'll call it, since we're not like 90 years old. But Ohio State lands San Diego State offensive tackle transfer target Josh Simmons out of the transfer portal. Simmons was on his official visit this weekend. We were hearing good things coming into the visit. It was kind of one of those deals where Ohio State, as much as Simmons feeling out Ohio State, I just think Ohio State wanted to make sure Simmons was kind of the right fit for them. Looks like the visit went great, obviously. Committed. Tony, definite starter, maybe starter? I mean, how do we look at this?
70-30 definite to maybe. I think my biggest question is, could he possibly play left tackle? And then you move Josh Fryer over to right tackle, where I assume he's better at right tackle. Josh Fryer better at right tackle than left tackle, but you've got an established starter, let's say Josh Simmons, with the 12 starts as a redshirt freshman last year, the kind of experience that Ohio State frankly doesn't have on the offensive line, so they needed to go and find, or wanted to go and find. And definite starter, I mean, I'm going to, if you're asking me to lay some odds of the three at right, if we throw them in the mix at right tackle with Zen Mahalski and Tegris Shabola, I think Josh Simmons is the smart money right now.
I agree. I mean, I think obviously they want a starting caliber guy. They've been searching for one for months. Had some guys either they decided not to go on, or had some other guys they weren't able to corral. I mean, at this point of the process, you're through the end of spring now. So this, Simmons only gets, he'll get summer workouts, of course, but fall camp is going to be kind of his time to shine. I don't know that you're doing this unless you're expecting a starter out of it. Because he's not going to push the competition during the spring because the spring's over.
Yeah, and we know when they do go to the portal, they're trying to get a starter. They're worried about the position that they have, and so they're trying to get a starter. And to be in the room when Ryan Day is talking about still having concerns about the offensive line after spring, and knowing that watching the right tackle position have issues all spring. You saw it as well with the pass rushers that Ohio State had. I think there's a sizable concern, and so they go to the portal. They get somebody with experience, somebody that Justin Fry knows about, somebody that was a legitimate recruiting prospect, 4-star guy. And I don't know if it's a capital letter offers from places like Georgia and stuff like that, being a California kid, but you can run down his recruiting profile and see Michigan, Georgia, Oklahoma, places, USC, offers from places like that. And so choosing to go to San Diego State, it's an interesting decision, but now he's clearly ready to take that next step. And I think Ohio State's a pretty good option for him. And I kind of assumed once Ohio State finished up with spring that there'd be some alerts being put out by Ohio State saying, "Hey, we could use any kind of offensive tackle, right tackle, whatever." And you look at what else is out there, and I'd say of this second wave, this spring wave, I don't know if there's anybody better than Josh Simmons, or he's on the level of the best guys out there. I don't know if that means he's great. It just means this is kind of what you're picking through. This is kind of what you have to deal with in the spring. That being said, the people at San Diego State seem to love him, and I know a lot of other people did, and they see him as they saw him as a pro prospect, and I assume Ohio State does as well because they're bringing him in.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of lay the foundation here. I would talk to Josh before his visit. We were speaking about his interest in Ohio State, and he started talking about Justin Fry. Justin Fry was the offensive line coach at UCLA when Simmons was coming out of high school, and he went to Helix High School out in the San Diego area, which I believe is the same high school that Reggie Bush comes from. So that's why he ended up at San Diego State. He's from that area. He just he stayed close to home. It wasn't a thing where he was from Texas and picked, San Diego State over Michigan and Georgia and all those programs. So he was a very highly recruited kid. He had over 30 offers. So 4-star prospect. But like I said, he camped with UCLA and they offered him. But he worked that day with Justin Fry, and he even told me, he said, there were some techniques I learned that day from Justin Fry that I carried with me to San Diego State. So you have to give Fry some, however this turns out, this was a Justin Fry production here. I mean, if this works out really well, you give Fry all the credit in the world for this, because this is a guy who used his prior relationship with Josh to get him in the fold, and I'm sure was pounding the table for him there in the room as they try and pick through some of the portal names. So this was kind of the first year, the 2023 kind of recruiting class and everything else or 2024 recruiting class where Fry gets to kind of put his fingerprints all over things, Tony. I mean, so what have you, I guess, seen so far from him as someone who I know likes to watch all the action on the recruiting trail?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that he's had to work from behind for so much time, and then to actually see him, you're seeing a lot of people talking about him, but then at the end of the day, it still comes down to who can you land, because you see what happened with the defensive line last year. Like Ohio State had their pick of all of these 5-star defensive ends, but at the end of the day, you can recruit and you can build relationships, but sometimes the NIL just takes over. And so if Ohio State can get the NIL part situated, which sounds like they are, and the recruiting situation with Justin Fry, it seems like he could start to really build some things here at Ohio State. And he's the kind of guy that can relate to guys still, because he's still pretty young himself. And it helps when there's a good Ohio class, then you can build some momentum there. And Ohio has that. And, in fact, I'd say it helps when you have a good Midwestern class, and Ian Moore being part of that in Indiana. Of course, Justin Fry being an Indiana guy, likes to recruit Indiana guys as well. And you look at Ohio State, Josh Fryer right there is an Indiana guy. So it's getting back to where it should be at Ohio State, I think, on the offensive line. But again, it gets bolstered by the Ohio recruiting. It reminds me of the Thad 5 back in the day, like Thad Matta's recruiting. Even aside from that class, a lot of his great recruiting was because Ohio and Indiana were very strong, and that's where he had his biggest ties. I think with Ohio State, your best offensive lines are always going to come when you have good in-state recruits, but then to be also having California connections to be able to go into the portal and get a Josh Simmons. I think that's a strength. And it kind of reminds me of, I think, some things that maybe Larry Johnson and Tony Alford have said in the past, where you recruit these guys for so long, and the guys that you miss, you can still keep in touch with. And this was years before the portal. Like now it's like, don't ever cut anybody off that you've recruited, basically. Like, always send, text at least once a week, if you see somebody. And I wonder, and you can probably talk to Marc Mantoni about this, but I wonder if they have a scale of guys that they lose out on in recruiting, that they, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, that guy's probably an 8. He's going to be in the portal at some point. And you just, touch base with this guy a little bit, because I think we both see guys that you figure, yeah, he's signing with this team right now, but in 2 or 3 years, he's going to be in the portal.
Yeah, and I've told this story before. I'm not going to get us too far off topic here, but I think it is somewhat on topic because we are talking about the portal here with the portal edition of Josh Simmons. But we were on the road last spring. We do our Southern Swing, which is coming up. So get on BuckeyeHuddle.com and get ready for that here soon. But we were doing our tour through the South, and we were at a high school in Georgia, and an assistant coach from a G5 school walked in, and I'm like, well, I was asking him who's here to see, and he was reeling off names that who's he's down here in the Georgia area to see, and he was reeling off names that like we were going to see too. And I was like, I'm not trying to be like rude here, but like, like are you actually in the game for these guys? Or and he said, look, he said, I've got he pulled out this list. He's like, I got the top 50 linebackers in the country, and I'm recruiting all of them, and we're probably not going to get many, if any of them, but I know half of these guys are probably going to be in the portal in 2 years. And so I'm recruiting all of them right now so that when they do hit the portal, I'm going to be there to swoop in. And so this is trickling down. Obviously, this is, so you've got, American Athletic Conference and Conference USA. You've got those assistants on the road recruiting 4 and 5-star kids, knowing they're not going to get them coming out of high school, but just to get the relationships in place when it's portal time.
It's crazy. Now you have also the trickle up basically from San Diego State to Ohio State. And it's another avenue to bolster your roster. And if you ignore it, Dabo Sweeney, if you ignore it, then you'll see that you'll start to take a downturn. Now there's different levels of, we're only going to, rely as much as possible on the portal. I think obviously recruiting is still the best way to build your program is through the high schools. But I think the portal, I like the way Ohio State uses the portal to just fill out some flat spots and some blank spots rather than, you can be mercenary like with Alabama where they shouldn't have as many flat spots as they've had with their recruiting. And yet they, to go get a Jahmyr Gibbs from Georgia Tech or Jamison Williams from Ohio State, or even a Tyler Buckner from Notre Dame. Should you really be having those kinds of issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, if you look at it, I guess every school at some point has a hole to fill. We've seen Ohio State go with Jonah Jackson. The Buckner thing I thought was kind of in a different league of its own. I thought there was, as someone who was pretty high on Jamison Williams coming out of high school and saw him flash at times at Ohio State, that kind of made sense to me. But yeah, I mean, there are times where it looks like a program's really reaching, and the flip side of this is, what we're seeing happen today and what we've kind of at Michigan State. It's kind of like, look, did they reap what they sowed there? Because, I mean, Mel Tucker gets that job and just goes out and gets like 30 mercenaries his first year. So it's like, is it one of those things where, if you go out and hire all these mercenaries, they are mercenaries. Like, don't be shocked if they, if they can find a better situation, if they're going to leave you in a year or two. So you're playing with fire a little bit.
And to lose productive players on like the last day is, I mean, that's almost, it feels purposeful on the player's part to leave this late in the process. Like, I am doing this on purpose. And, what is the messaging there?
Yeah, that's a good point that I hadn't really thought about, because I can't imagine all of a sudden they woke up this morning and said, I think I'm going to transfer. It had to be brewing for a good little bit. So that's interesting. And then, of course, there's no tampering going on. So I'm sure that didn't weigh into it at all either, that no one would tamper.
Although, wouldn't it be very rivalry-like to wait until the last day and then throw some money at your rival's best players? That way, you can bring them on over, and now you've left your rivals without a quarterback and a receiver. Although I keep seeing rumblings that maybe Peyton Thorne had lost the job or was losing the job in the spring, which would shock me considering he's a 2-year starter and I think a pretty decent player. But I obviously haven't paid too much attention to what's going on in East Lansing until today.
Yeah, always interesting in the portal. The last thing I think we'll talk about here, I wanted to get back to a point you were making earlier about Josh Simmons, where he would fit into this line. Should he, I could argue this both ways. I mean, should he stay at right tackle and get him in his comfort zone and let Fryer continue to work where he's been working all spring? Or do you get Fryer back into a spot that he did very well in spot duty last year? He started, right? Didn't he start a game or two?
Yep.
I know Dewan got injured. Dewan was battling an injury there for a while. And we didn't really notice a drop off. So do you get Fryer back to where he's comfortable and then give Simmons the summer to work on his pass sets from the left side instead of the right side and hope that works? I mean, I could go either way on that.
I think it depends on how well, as they've watched the film, Fryer graded out this spring. I think that will play into it. Now, Ryan Day after the spring game, didn't want to say that Josh Fryer had locked down that position, even though he was the only first stringer that we ever saw really at left tackle. But yeah, and how long do you go with whatever you choose? Like, how long in fall camp do you, like, we're going to be like, okay, let's just continue to give Josh Fryer time. He's not where we want him yet, but maybe with 2 weeks in fall camp, he will be. But by that point, can you go that long? How long do you go with, say you want to try Josh Simmons at left tackle? How long do you go there? And so it almost feels like this decision has to be made before camp ever, even for, summer workouts, so that guys can get, doing their, their drops and things like that from their footed position, right or left. So I think this has to be made this summer, and it just depends on how they feel about Josh Fryer at left tackle and whether they see was the trajectory going up, or had he just stayed the same throughout spring. And I think if he just stayed throughout spring, do you expect him to stay the same throughout fall camp? And is that same good enough? And do they think it would be better than Josh Simmons at left tackle? So still some things to be sorted out as well. But I think they'd love for Josh Fryer to be able to handle left tackle. That way Josh Simmons can just continue to blossom. But being a redshirt freshman going to a redshirt sophomore year, he's going to grow anyway, because that's the first year of starting to the second year of starting. It's a different world. We've seen that throughout the years at Ohio State. And maybe if we do get to talk to the Ohio State coaches yet this spring, I'm sure that will be one of the topics brought up.
I think they have to cross train them in the summer at least. Whatever you're giving them the workout plans. I know, like, it's not like they can really be out. I know they have guys that can be out there kind of working them out, but I would be telling them like equal right and left side, and kind of see when they come into fall camp, you get an idea of like, okay, they've been doing this all summer, like who looks the most comfortable on, do something like that and just kind of figure it out. But I think they have to. I mean, they cross train. That's not the same thing. This is actually much more difficult than what they do with the receivers. But they cross train the receivers.
Defensive tackles too.
Yep. So this isn't like unheard of, but it is kind of a tough thing to do when everything's like backwards.
Yeah.
It's like swinging a golf club. If you're right-handed, it's like swinging a golf club left-handed.
And some other Buckeyes who have had to make the change have made much more crude analogies as to what it's like going from right-handed to left-handed. But for Josh Fryer, that's all he's ever known in his career, going from one side to the other. And that's what he talked about this spring. He's played every position. It doesn't matter which side. So it's a lot easier for him, for Zen Mahalski, to be a left tackle last year, and that spent his first 2 years at left tackle, than to learn in the new handedness of right tackle this spring was more difficult for him, because that's the first time he's ever done it. Josh Fryer, that's why I tend to think you can, as you said, continue to cross-train Josh Fryer. However, he's a guy that they just, wherever they put him last year, he did well. And he also, remember, I think Enoch Vamahi got a start late in the season at right guard, and he struggled that first series. They put Josh Fryer there, and boom, everything was fine. So, I mean, it seems funny to, not that we're doubting him, but to question whether he can handle left tackle, because all he's ever done when given an opportunity is played well. And that goes back to when he was a very young backup, and he held his own as this 3-star throw-in from Indiana who just continued to impress.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think wherever he settles, they'll be confident with him, and he should be able to get the job done. Um, I guess just finally, how big do you think this is? Getting Simmons, I think it's huge. Am I overreacting? I mean, I've been scared to death of that right tackle situation all spring.
Yeah, no, I think it's very big because for one, it gives them more options, but two, it gives them a starter, and not necessarily a starter for them, but somebody who has started. And now it gives them technically another upperclassman. He's going into his third year, and he's played, and it's experience, and it's better competition. It's more competition for Zen Mahalski and Tigris Shabola. Those guys can still win the job, but they're going to have to raise their games up, which is exactly what Justin Fry and Ryan Day want. So this is an addition that it's raises all boats, that kind of tide. And whether he starts or not, I think whoever starts because of this competition will be better than whoever would have started had they not brought in Simmons.
All right. Well, another big portal addition for the Buckeyes. That makes two over the weekend. Taiwan Malone on campus. Still looking a couple. It looks like they're looking at the defensive back out of UAB, whose name escapes me. Just released a top 6, but Simmons in the fold for the Buckeyes. Oklahoma was his visit last week. Florida was scheduled for next week. Obviously, that won't be happening now. So they didn't. They beat out some pretty big programs for Simmons, and we'll see what they've got here once fall camp opens. But, personally, like I said, I think this is pretty important given how that right tackle spot seemed to struggle during spring. So appreciate everyone watching, listening. We will catch you next time.